All right, hello and welcome to Redspin Sports. It's the 26th of June, 2020. It just so happens to be the birthday of your co-host here, Nate Wallace. Here.
Happy birthday to you. That's my singing voice for you, Nate. Happy
All
birthday,
right,
man.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it, Mike. So there's a lot to get to in the world of sports in this strange COVID context in which we're in. This context of post George Floyd protests, pandemic, no sports. I know I've watched a lot more just kind of classic games on my own, like going back to the last ride with Jordan, some just old college football stuff, some just kind of all over the spot. But I think a lot of people have been doing that, and it's getting to a point now where it's sort of strange. It's just it is what it is. But at the same time, sort of along the lines of what Kyrie Irving said a couple of weeks ago about how starting back up the games when there's so much social injustice going on, there's so much uncertainty going on. It's ironic now, and maybe you can speak to this real quick, Mike, that the tables have been kind of turned. We're both from Jacksonville, Florida, but I'm up here in the New York City area. And well, we had this super early outbreak, given all the international travel that goes in and out of New York City, and obviously people bringing it back, mainly business travelers at first, and then it's spreading. This was the pandemic hotbed, and then now, New York, New Jersey, put in some pretty stringent policies. I mean, not to the degree that they did in Italy or they did in China, and they had true lockdowns, right? Which I'm not against. I mean, it actually, for short-term pain, they certainly flattened the curve, and they're much better off for it. But I mean, I just was talking to my dad, talking to other people back in Florida, and maybe you can speak to it. Whereas here, you're ostracized completely if you go into a store with no mask on. That people have kind of adapted to that, I think, because of the severity of the early outbreak. So what's the situation down in Florida right now? Because we all know the NBA restart's going to be going on down there in Orlando. And before we dive into our agenda, I was just kind of curious on a personal note, just kind of the compare and contrast, sort of the way people are responding to COVID. Is there any class dynamics to it? Because I've noticed sometimes in lower income neighborhoods, people kind of have a more just like F it mentality because people don't, they ain't got nothing to lose. And also mom and pop shops need the businesses more. So they're not going to sit there and jump on somebody to, not make a sale because of a mask. But I don't know, what's your take on like what you've seen in Jacksonville and in Florida in terms of, on a personal level and then also the state's response?
So what's up, y'all? I'm Michael Sampson down in Jacksonville. I think in response to COVID, I mean, you see what you saw. Like back a couple months ago, there was like, shit talking between Governor Cuomo of New York and Governor DeSantis, Florida. Florida is like, it's a state that traditionally has a lot of like demographics, mixed demographics, but it's considered in a lot of ways Northern Florida, Southern Georgia, Southern Alabama for the Panhandle. You have a very kind of rural, kind of Dixie vibe, and how, especially with state government, due to gerrymandering, suppression of vote, rural counties having such a huge influence in Florida. I'll give you an example, even that, like the last governor's election, the Democrat actually won all the major cities, but the Republican still won, so that kind of shows how the rural vote in Florida has been so fucking gerrymandered that to benefit a certain class of people that, of course, when it comes to state politics, those people we're going to run it. And that even goes with COVID. The response from the bourgeoisie, the ruling class in Florida has always been, well, it's not really that bad in some rural counties, or it may be bad in Miami, but that's Miami because, Miami has a lot of, immigrants and stuff like that. I mean, it's kind of like implied.
Not so subtle.
They shit talk Miami like how they shit talk like New York. How they be like, oh, New Yorkers, they're all like, savages, abomination of God, shit like that. They do that to Miami and Florida. So like the governor's approach was very piecemeal, maybe some restrictions or whatnot, but kind of, we want to take a very controlled, open, cautious approach, trying to open up shit. We got the fucking RNC coming to Jacksonville in 2 months.
Yeah.
There's no mandate on that with any safety precautions in regards to masks and stuff like that. So essentially it's been very piecemeal here. And as a result, due to the rural density of the state, lack of testing, which is a big thing, there hasn't been as much testing as the politicians say. Even if you ask hospital workers, they haven't even gotten tests. You know, not everybody who's worked at a hospital has gotten a test. So that kind of shows there's not enough testing to test everybody, because you would want to test the people on the fucking front lines, like a nurse who is possibly confronted with patients who maybe carrying the disease. So we saw this shit talking, this bickering. Florida governor Ron DeSantis, or the shittest. He did a travel ban from New York. It was like he blamed it on the New Yorkers coming down and spreading the COVID. And now New York, Connecticut, and the tri-state area is doing the same with Florida, because Florida never really dealt with the issue. It never went into a restrict lockdown. It never really dealt with COVID. And I think that has a direct correlation to which factor of capital rules Florida. And it's this factor of capital that wants no regulation on any type of business, which means no laws such as those associated with COVID in terms of dealing with a pandemic that would restrict somebody's ability to still run their business and still have customers coming in. Think about capitalism, and that's essentially what it is. You can't necessarily run a free market capitalist system without social distancing. So, of course, in the South, where you've had this renegade form of capitalism, which is rooted in the Confederacy and slavery and this super exploitation of profits, you're going to have the businesses down here be more cavalier in regards to not even giving a shit about this pandemic. And as a result of that, you have very short-term policies, short-sighted goals, which leads to long-term fuck-ups. And right now, Florida just had 9,000 cases today, a record. Is it a record in the world? Because I feel like I read in Italy, they didn't have 9,000 cases in one day. It's like an obscene, horrible thing that's happening. Yet, sports teams play in Florida. We're going to have a bubble down in Orlando who has record cases. You're going to have the RNC in Florida with record cases. I don't know if you saw this, Nate. 214 firefighters had to quarantine in Florida.
Wow. What part of the state?
In Jacksonville. 214 firefighters had to go into quarantine. They're at the Duval County Jail. We did a caravan. We demanded the prisoners be released to depopulate the jail. So the cops here did it a little. And then we found out when all the George Floyd protests started happening, they're actually housing more people now than they were before COVID. What happens? There's no inmates who apparently have COVID. And then last week it drops that, there's 20 inmates. And today it drops, there's 77 inmates.
Right.
They haven't been testing anybody, man. This is all bullshit. They've literally tried to cook the books on COVID.
Well, there's the contrast. I mean, I'll give you for a personal anecdote. I had to go in for a medical procedure. I live over just across the river in Jersey City, but it was in Manhattan. And to even have any sort of medical procedure now, you have to come in 48 hours in advance, get your COVID test, and before you could even come back. That's just a mandate. And the testing is the nurse was even joking with me that it used to be that testing was hard to get. Now they say we have so many tests, we don't know what to do with. Is what she told me. So we're testing at it's free. It's free for everyone up here now. I'm sure that there's certain variations still in terms of the availability of it in certain communities. But it's a huge contrast, and it's certainly ironic given the way this thing started out and the narrative being that this was the most unsafe place to be. So things have.
It's funny because I was shit talking this national for months. I've been shit talking the National Democratic Party strategy. Besides shit talking the National Democratic Party, which is everybody does that. So it's not but they've had this super strategy. Let's not demand $2,000 a month to everybody during this COVID pandemic like they're doing in Canada. Let's not demand that. Let's just demand a national testing strategy, which I thought was why the hell aren't you demanding hazard pay for frontline workers, shit like that people can grab a hold to and actually build a movement for. So they should have been doing that, but I guess the testing strategy makes sense too, because you don't really have that, and the more tests you're getting, the more Trump is literally out here saying, the only reason we have more tests positive is because we're testing more. I'm well, that's the fucking point. You need to find out who has the virus and shit. But the crazy part and how it connects to sports, and I just realized this, Nate, and we talked about this, it was actually the sports teams, the pro leagues that pushed all these states to open. If it wasn't for Florida telling these football teams, hey, come down here, you can play here. Our stadiums are open. You can play at Ben Hill Griffin Jr. Stadium. You know, you can play an NFL game there. That caused these states like California, who are going to be closed up even longer, it caused them to want to open up faster. It caused New York, who was like the epicenter, it caused Cuomo to go on camera talking about we're going to find a way to have football here. So it was actually Florida and the sports leagues that really pushed this dramatic opening up. And now the same state in Florida and all these other states like Texas and Arizona, which pushed opening up policies so drastically and wanted these conventions and these games to come, these are the fucking states that are having record outbreaks of COVID. So It's kind of, it shows it just shows the short-sightedness of how capital works and how capitalism works and how these ruling class people think.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's also divisions within the ruling class. You obviously have people that are like the elite families that are like dynasty-like families, such as the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, DuPonts, people like that. You know, they think long-term. You know, they're invested in the system, so they'll deal with like short-term losses if they know that it's like something better for the structure of, you know, the neoliberal capitalist system, global system that's, you know, hegemonic in our world today. But it's the new money people. It's the you know, nouveau riche that like are, you know, don't care about that are concerned solely about short-term profits, and they're the ones that are really pushing that. There's more of them than there are the ultra elite. So there's your division in that. I mean, in terms of I think what the irony is that the Yankees and Mets are back doing their quote spring training now up in New York because it's safer than being down in Florida. You know, not to mention the heat's starting to pick up too and stuff, but it's hot up here too.
It's 81 degrees still here.
It has nothing to do with that. It has to.
It's just hot as hell, man. Like, it's just hot as hell.
It's hot. And we're right there with you right now. To be honest, I've been tracking it the last few days. So let's go ahead and transition into like the main crux of the program. I really want to start off tonight. There's so many ways we could go, but I want to start in Manhattan, the Little Apple, Kansas, with the Kansas State Wildcat football program. We have a situation of a young, I'd say just the biggest tool that I've probably come across in quite some time.
McNeil, yeah.
Jaden McNeil. We have a new Richard Spencer. You know, guys with like 20,000 followers on Twitter. He's actually,
don't give him that credit.
I mean, I don't think that's that much credit. I mean, I think that he's, you know, Richard Spencer's. It's not a great landscape for them, and I think it's a good thing that a lot of them are finding it harder to find work that are like, you know, within the main, you know, corporate landscape, you know, aside from their funding from like white nationalists and all that. And that's part of like what, you know, movements want to do is make there be a price to pay for, you know, having these sort of ideologies, expressing them, you know, and then using the guise of the First Amendment and free speech to like say that, you know, they're being oppressed and whatnot, which of course is where Jaden McNeil is coming from. I mean, it's as cartoonish as you could possibly imagine. He's sitting there talking about George Floyd. It's been a month now, so he could finally like pass a drug test, and it's like, you know, have, you know, nothing in the system. Obviously, you know, just totally just spitting on his life, and then making the point that he shouldn't be made to feel bad because George Floyd was a criminal who was committed an armed robbery in 2007, which he went to pay his price for. But this whole notion of robbing a pregnant woman and stuff is BS. And frankly, I don't even want to give it, you know, any more legs than what I just did, because it's the same kind of stuff. It reminds me of the Trayvon Martin situation where, you know, it was like, you know, he got in a fight at school or got caught smoking weed.
It's not even
stuff. It's not about that.
It's every situation of any black person or any person gunned down by the cops.
Michael Brown, you know.
Michael Brown, it's the
Eric Garner.
You have to dehumanize the subject to have the narrative control, you know. So that's why you often read an article. Let's say there was a brother, I think his name was Jonas Joseph, in Tampa, The cop shot into his car 69, 70 times. You know what the article said? Suspect alleged in drive-by shot by police. So like the people are reading this fucking article and they see, oh, he's person was in a drive-by. That's justified. It's justified for the cops to kill him. So in the same way they said Trayvon had weed in the system, the same way they said Mike Brown was violent, had violent tendencies, same way they said Freddie Gray had drug problems, they use this as a guise to dehumanize. And part of what Jaden McNeil or
That's right.
Jaden McQuill, loser face, dickhead, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, he just tried to find a joke to get some popularity. And now he's on like all these right-wing conservative dweebs who don't support the Black Lives Matter movement, want to be different, you know, because you have corporations who are fucking putting out statements saying Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Come on, like capitalism is perfectly fine with saying Black Lives Matter.
Right. There's nothing threatening about making it. Right.
Nothing wrong with saying it. It's a declaration. It's not necessarily a policy change or a capital redistribution of wealth. It's a statement.
It's the abstract it's the abstract unity. We're unified.
Abstract unity, but it's also it's like a basic belief in the democratic right that a Black Lives Matter. Whatever. I'm happy you support that. Finally,
all right.
Floyd's 8-minute murder to allow you to see that, but he's doing this. He says this shit about George Floyd, and of course, the Kansas State football players, the athletes, the generating revenue students on campus get pissed off and want action taken. So and now you have these right-wing conservatives, like I just said, who don't support Black Lives Matter movement. Now they're all saying that his free speech is being infringed upon. First of all, free speech, First Amendment only applies to the government infringing upon it. And also, fuck off, man. It's not going to work out this time. This is a different, like, these athletes are aware of the revenue that they create for these colleges. They're aware of the power that they have as collegiate athletes. I even read today, Nate, that the Kansas State girls women's basketball team is refusing to participate in any recruiting or donor activities while this student is here.
Yeah, so I mean, Jaden McNeil's got to go, right? I mean,
so these right wingers who are still holding on to this last hope of denying what's happening in society right now, denying the changes. Because that's the thing. If I was a right winger and I wanted to be smart, I would say Black Lives Matter while still doing the same bullshit. But I would just say it. But they want to be so different that they're going to say that, oh, our First Amendment right is getting infringed upon. So, oh, look at what's happening. The PC culture is going after this poor student who's white and blah, blah, blah. You know what's going to happen? That college administrator, those white Kansas State boosters, they're going to kick that kid out of college. And rightfully fucking so, because he doesn't understand what breads the butter for these universities, and it's these collegiate athletes. And if they don't want to play because this racist is on campus saying all this shit, who are they going to choose? They're going to choose the moneymakers.
Let's go back to the example of the University of Missouri just a few years ago. It was like shortly after Michael Sam. I mean, and they had that the Michael Sam side. They showed players on the team showed a lot of solidarity with him. But I think it was the season after he finished playing at Mizzou, where they got the university president to resign by threatening not to play. I want to go ahead while we're on this just to give some specific quotes. It says, this is according to a dailyherald.com article that came out just a few hours ago.
Students in 1950, the University of Missouri.
Right.
It's an organization, yep.
Okay, so like it says Kansas State University is reviewing its options. I always love that one. After a tweet by a student about the death of George Floyd prompted outrage from several students, including 2 football players who threatened to leave, the school's president said Friday. So a month after, it's been a month since Floyd, a black man, died after a white Minneapolis officer pressed his knee on his neck for nearly 8 minutes, actually more than 8 minutes. Student Jaden McNeil tweeted, "Congratulations to George Floyd on being drug-free for an entire month." So the university, which, Mike, to your point, I mean, I think they probably will eventually come around, but they have not to this day. They're making this ridiculous. University President Richard Myers says that divisive statements do not represent for the values of our university. That's a very awkwardly phrased statement anyways. I don't know what the for is doing there. It's kind of a strange preposition. But anyways, we condemn racism and bigotry in all its forms. We are launching an immediate review of universities' options. Black Lives Matter at Kansas State University, and we will continue to fight for social justice. So this group, I don't know if I'm going to paraphrase the rest of this, is like called America First Students. This guy was the founder here. That's how he describes himself. Their chapter at Kansas State says it's currently not a registered organization on campus because of a lack of membership. So America First Students have a lack of membership, correct? Yeah. So they're
Kansas State. You have membership for America First at Kansas State? Are you just not like talking to anybody?
He's busy communicating with like Candace Owens and Ann Coulter and like and Charlie Kirk or whatever on the internet, right?
I saw Michelle Malkin defend her. I was like, am I in 2012 now?
I didn't know. I didn't know she still existed. But I'm glad you. I'm glad you're able to bring her back into my consciousness. But anyways, America First Students had already drawn the ire of students for past statements made by McNeil. Yeah, so this guy sits in his dorm room making statements. I love these organizations. First of all, and you've seen this within like movements where, you really got these kind of like moribund or weak organizations that have like, every organization does it to some extent, but
national money behind them.
But you come up with these grandiose names like the committee for this and the America First this, and then you go to a meeting and a lot of these are like it's like 2 or 3 people sitting around on a laptop. So I mean you can
that's what like a lot of these organizations you see on campus, like that right-wing organization. That's why they always say like colleges are a liberal bastion, because I mean, like any of these right-wing organizations you see on campus, let's say there's a college Republicans, they may have a decent membership, but not as big as the left group memberships on campus, or these groups like America First, they only really survive because there's rich donors who are willing to put money into it to make sure there's a presence of them on campus.
Right.
What was it at FSU? Students for Prosperity?
Yeah, it was something like that, but
funded like
right
group.
But you create a material incentive for it. So if you're someone who's not really passionate politically, like you see an avenue there, like, hey, if I'm just trying to be a social riser and kind of climb the ladder and social mobility, it's a great way to hop on it if you don't have any scruples or whatever it may be.
Well, I guess values, right? I mean, like we said, like in 2015, 2016, there was a student group, Concerned Student in 1950, which raised issues in regards to racism at the University of Missouri. And I believe it kind of revolved around them finding like racist kind of literature on campus, banana peels, stuff like that. There was and Missouri had always had this issue, like most college campuses, most predominantly white institutions like a Kansas State University or a Missouri. In Missouri 2010, they had 2 white students who dropped cotton balls in front of the Black Student Culture Center. These campuses are starting to, like Black people in this country are getting awakened. And I think those who support the democratic struggle for Black Lives Matter or for Black liberation are also starting to get awakened. So they're getting a lot more power on these campuses than they necessarily didn't used to have years ago. And these right-wing students are trying to hide behind this First Amendment, you're restricting my free speech. At the end of the day, capitalism doesn't really give a shit about free speech. It doesn't. Like, capitalism favors the speech that reinforces the rule of capital. It doesn't necessarily give a shit about free speech that doesn't do so. And let's just say you might be right. This Jaden,
Jaden McNeil.
I know his name, man. I'm just trying to say like the worst shit. Like the kid fucking sucks. Jaden McNeil. He was he's trying to pull. So let's just say his views align with the president, who wants the university to have as much money as possible. And it's probably a right-winger that supports neoliberal capitalist policies. The president is going to side with the football players who generate the revenue for the school. And I'm not sure how much Kansas State football team generates for that athletic department.
Well, they're in the Big 12, and I'll put it this way. I'll break it down. I mean, so in that state, historically, it's a basketball state first. I mean, but the University of Kansas Jayhawks are like a blue blood program in college basketball. So Kansas State basketball is always in their shadow. So football under Bill Snyder, who the old guy who like just recently I think has stepped down, really developed like really a niche there. I remember guys like Michael Bishop was a quarterback. I remember they had a series of really good players. They've had good teams. Darren Sproles. So they're not like some just pushover type program, right? Tyler Lockett. So
I got the numbers. Yeah, Kansas State, their football team. So it wasn't that much. Well, it's pretty good. They generated $40 million in revenue last year, compared to a Texas, which is like $134 million. So it's not as much as a Texas, but $40 million is a lot more than Jaden McDickhead is generating. Mm-hmm. And these boosters and these, colleges are big business. Me and Nate went to Florida State University, and we saw how these, like our board of trustees at Florida State University used to be the CEO of SunTrust Bank, these construction companies. The board of governors here was like all like developers, big corporations that would make so much money off of the college campuses, big housing developments, bringing in more students so we can have more apartment complexes built to house the students and make money. So they're making money off the students in housing. They're making money off the students with food. They're making money off the students with football and with free labor through college football. So that $40 million of revenue in this time and place, in this Asian climate, you think they give a shit about what a right-winger is tweeting?
That's going
to upset the profit. I don't think so.
All right, we got to move on. Then let me just ask you this before we move on. Like, why in the statement tonight was the president of the university? Granted, we don't know about this guy in depth, but we do know like the things you just said, and I agree in terms of like their concrete material interests and their interests of profitability and being able to finance their athletic departments and the other revenues that the athletic department brings in for the university. Why would the university come out and hedge tonight then? Make a big statement on a Friday night? Why would he just come out and not straight up condemn the guy? I mean, like
because he just doesn't want a lawsuit.
Okay, so he did just due process. Yeah,
it's a process.
All right.
I'm sure they're going to go through their code of conduct. They're going to go through their internal review. They're going to talk to their lawyers to figure out how they could fuck with the student and show an example, because it's also dialectical. As long as the black students and the black players are pissed off, they're going to have to act. If the black players and the black students and the black athletes aren't as pissed off, then they may not have to act. So it's up to those players, again, who are tweeting about that to keep the pressure on. Like, because, this shouldn't be allowed to happen. I mean, like we at UNF 2 years ago, the students group here, UNF Students for a Democratic Society, actually had to kick a Nazi off of campus. And it made students so pissed off. He was threatening the student groups and threatening protesters. He was in these Charlottesville documentaries and all that shit. The university found a way to get him off the campus. Why? Because you had enough students was pissed off about it, enough boosters, alumni, people who would donate to the school didn't like the look of it. So they found a way to get him off campus, and I think they'll do the same here.
Right. So I'll give you a little, just before we move on, this guy's Twitter bio: president and founder of American First Students, Christian conservative gamer, #MAGA. He's got a picture of himself full on in cross mode here, like he's on a revival, and he's gained now more than, I think, around, since the last time I checked about 6 hours ago, he's added 6,000 followers on Twitter, including Charlie Kirk, who along with Candace Owens runs Turning Points USA. So if you don't need, there's your evidence right there.
It's a job opportunity. It's a career opportunity.
Exactly. And the fact that there are so many people, thousands of people that jump at the opportunity, that hail this guy as a champion of free speech against the quote unquote mob mentality, and all this language you're seeing here of this guy now being retweeted, held up. The only thing I really want to hit on here is that let's see. And so he goes, he is talking about how he's actually going off about. I mean, this guy needs to act really, really. I don't want to get in trouble saying anything, but this guy is one of the most detestable, loathsome living beings on this planet. I mean, he's go ahead, check out his
ass whoop.
Check his Twitter handle at McNeil
and
Jaden.
I'm not saying I'm gonna whoop his ass.
Right,
that guy needs his ass whooped.
Yeah, at McNeil Jaden, he's talking about black tears and like how sensitive they are, and how football players are a bunch of are soft in so many words when you take the helmet off. So he's gonna get his. We'll see what happens, but he's gonna get his. I mean, and I've had about enough of on this cat right now. So
well, speaking of crappy, shitty statements in response to controversies, I quickly go over. There's been a big push, like with all the college campuses, around changing cultural, symbols on campus. So this has been changing names of at the University of Clemson, changing names of dormitories and buildings named after segregation.
What about Thomas Clemson, who's like the son-in-law of John C. Calhoun himself? So I mean, hey,
change the
keep it. Let's keep going, man. The South Carolina Mountain Tech University, up in the upstate, man.
Southern South Carolina University.
Well, Clemson is in the mountainous area of South Carolina. It's up in the little corner where it's right near the border with Georgia and North Carolina. So it's like you could just call it southern tip of Appalachia State, Dabo University. We'll figure that out.
Trevor Lawrence University. So Doak Campbell, he was the first president of the Florida State University. He was part of the transition from it becoming an all-women's school to a co-educational institution between 1941 and 1957. The football stadium is named after Doak Campbell, Bobby Bowden Field. So there's been a petition actually started by a former FSU linebacker. I believe his name is Kendrick Smith, who's actually a doctor now down in Miami. He started a petition because Doak Campbell was also a segregationalist. So apparently he did some good stuff, donated to this and all that shit, and did some whatever. But apparently he also was a weak person. He sided with the segregationists. He was strongly opposed to the admission of African-American students to Florida State University and all that jazz. So there's been a controversy in regards to that, because just earlier that week, there was a controversy in regards to the president of the University of Florida eliminating the chant "Gator Bait" due to its historical racist connotations.
Which is ironic because that didn't even start till the 90s with black players doing that, but still, I understand.
President Fuchs. No, whatever. I'm not even going to argue about that. I think
I know, it's just kind of funny though.
It probably turned more people against the cause with that shit. That's like classic, like white guy trying to find
creating a problem where no one's even saying there's a problem.
Yo, quick digression. Did you see in Texas? I read a TMZ article. They're not going to call it a master bedroom no more. They're just going to call it bedroom because of the term man. Shit this, come on, man.
That sounds more like the white guilt politics or anything else.
That's like a white guilt. It's not even white. It's like these people don't have white guilt. They're like ruling class figures.
You're right.
They're just throwing bones out. But back to Florida State University, there's this huge controversy around renaming the stadium. So I bring you back to President John Thrasher, who was a former right-wing legislator, anti-immigrant, anti-worker. But apparently when he became president of Florida State University, he became for sanctuary campuses. It's funny how politics changes your impressions of your views. His statements about surrounding this, because we just talked about a crappy statement from the president that was kind of all sides matter. John Thrasher's statement was, "I have been following with great interest a petition circulating on social media asserting that Doak S. Campbell, FSU's president in 1947 during his transition from the Florida State College for Women, resisted integration and asking that the stadium no longer bear his name. I have asked athletics director David Coburn to immediately review this issue and make recommendations to me."
Another right-wing Florida politician.
I look forward to receiving this report soon.
I mean, what is he? What is there to report on? I mean, it's David. I mean, these are
well, he needs some files. Like,
right.
Get some files out, and like this report is like, oh, should we keep this the same name as a segregationist? I'm sure Doe Campbell did some whatever. I'm sure Doe Campbell did some whatever. Like, change the name. At this point, you got recruits. Like we said at previous shows, the lifeblood for these essential kind of slave like things, these plantations in which these collegiate athletes, wealth is extracted from their labor and they get no compensation for it. But the fact that there's forces of even boosters at Florida State University who have threatened to not give money to Florida State University if they change the name of the stadium. Now, as a Florida State fan, I'm sure you would probably say that those boosters don't really do much of nothing anyway, which is why you've had issues with, you know what I mean, with like facilities not being built. But I would also say that why would you jeopardize your standing with your black players simply over the name of a segregationist?
I mean, the only thing I can think. I mean, you're going to have to. I mean, I mean, how many university presidents? Let's go down the list. Brian Denny Stadium. I mean, it's going to happen there. I mean, Chuck Jordan. I mean, Chuck Jordan at Auburn. I mean, you got General Neyland at Tennessee. You got the Stephen C. O'Connell basketball arena at the University of Florida. So I mean, I'm just going to say, I mean, if it's going to go this way, the part of the thing that I think might be strategically advantageous here to the movement, just on a pure political level, is you're starting to really see the backlash, the rage. I'll say it, just like the fact that these right wingers are very like triggered by all this. They're very much the sense that they're under attack, their heritage is under attack, and as a result, they become more unhinged and more unhinged. So by pushing some of these issues, by pushing the name stuff, it almost serves a purpose on its own, in the sense that it reveals to more and more people that maybe aren't as like conscious of like just how ingrained and how systemic the white supremacy is. It brings it to the surface, and by their reactions to stuff, just kind of like the way the cops react, and they start beating people up, and it goes on, and then they can't even restrain themselves, because then they build more power for the movement, because that's their nature. They know how to use force. These people, they're gonna increasingly become more unhinged, and it's gonna reveal to more and more people just the conditions that have always existed, but now are just being brought to the surface in a way that has been kind of submerged for a while. You kind of had the 1960s, the civil rights movement. People made a lot of this stuff went underground. People started kind of only saying the N-word, kind of in their car, but listening to Rush Limbaugh, driving home from work and stuff, and being more careful and PC. But now it's like this Trumpian era has kind of lifted the lid back off of it, brought us back, and just annihilated any notions of like the BS post-racialism stuff that we, people that have been in the movement known for a long time. It's just that it's nonsense. But it's starting to come to the surface now. So which brings us now. So Doe Campbell Stadium, I mean, we'll see what happens next, but certainly it'll be, if Doe goes, and there's going to be a whole laundry list of others that would have to fall in that category too. But what about, let's go on to Mississippi now, because you got the state flag controversy there that's brewing. You got Kylin Hill, running back Mississippi State, threatening to boycott the season if changes are not, if the new flag is not adopted. Now you're starting to see real movement. You even had Mike Leach looking super uncomfortable in his maroon sport coat at the state capitol in Jackson, Mississippi yesterday, having to do photo op with the coaches from Jackson State, Alcorn State, Mississippi Valley State, where Jerry Rice went, Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin was there. And the fact that they feel the need to do this, they first of all, they have a self-invested interest in the fact that other schools are going to use that against Mississippi schools, especially Ole Miss, given their history with the Confederate flag and the Colonel Rebel symbolism. But you're starting to see real change. And the latest I saw tonight that there's people, legislators in Mississippi, talking about that they have the votes now. You can't do a referendum on these things because referendums they're going to break down in a state like Mississippi on racial lines like they did in 2001. And it'd just be like putting, school integration. Like if you put Brown v. Board of Education decision up for a popular vote, you don't violate the 14th Amendment and equal protection, just to say the least. But of course, like you can't, vote on people's rights and let like some tyranny of, a slight majority of whites, like, maintain these symbols. But like we're starting to see real change there. And the reason I bring this up is the power of sports, the power of like this space, and especially in a time when things are on pause. Like things are not business as usual. Players are having more time to think, reflect. We've had huge disruptions in the way business as usual is done. And we're going to see, I predict, within a week or two, the Mississippi state flag. It was enacted during the era of redemption, one of the most reactionary periods in the history of this country, which is saying a lot. After it was 1894, it was after Reconstruction had been abandoned. All the money for freedmen's bureaus and every other Reconstruction organization was abandoned. So this flag goes along with that period of Jim Crow being established, poll taxes being put in place, grandfather clauses being enacted, lynching starting to proliferate and become spectacles. So that this flag, that's the context in which it came into being. It was a propaganda war where the South did lose on the battlefield, but in a lot of ways they won the propaganda war when you look at it in terms of like from the 1880s and 90s through like the 1960s and 70s, where you had until these Confederate symbols were built, these monuments, these flags were enacted. When you look at Georgia, it was in 1956, a direct reaction to Brown v. Board of Education. You had South Carolina put the Confederate battle flag up on its dome in 1962, State Capitol Dome, ostensibly because it was honoring the centennial of the Confederacy. In reality, it was resistance to the Civil Rights Movement. So you're seeing this BS, like the whole heritage, not hate stuff has always been just what it is, but it's just so patently ridiculous now. And people are like seeing it more and more. And people, look, symbols, you can say, what does it matter? I mean, how do symbols matter? Like, why don't we make change? But the reality is by fighting symbols, by getting people engaged, by taking down, these symbols, it's empowering and it brings people in and makes them start wanting more and realizing that like, learning about just how things really are. That like the way they've been conditioned to live and what they think is normal doesn't have to be normal. It's a systemic, it's part of a systemic structure where people are exploited, where people are stuck in situations where they have to rely on payday loans or in exploitative labor situations. There's scarcity of labor in order to keep them divided and unable to have, make demands at the workplace and have any kind of power over their lives. And it's like, by making these victories, people get a taste of what they're capable of by coming together and the possibilities that exist when true solidarity exists. So what are your thoughts, Mike, as it relates to any of those things and how the sort of the arena of sports and that the cultural power it holds has really played a role we've seen here in changing the discourse on this?
100%. In the same way that, let's say, the George Floyd murder at the hands of the killer cops had an impact.
Officer chauvinist.
Officer chauvinist. I don't even officer rotten prison.
Rotten prison chauvinist.
Rotten prison, given the death penalty. I think it's in the same way that you've seen how that case itself has reignited a lot of cases of police killings that have happened in the past that kind of went cold or the momentum stopped. I think you've seen that George Floyd unite the fire with a lot of these old cases, but I think George Floyd and this huge movement that we have against racism has ignited a lot of these struggles that have taken place. There's always been a struggle in Mississippi in regards to the flag. Mississippi was one of the key places during radical Reconstruction in which African Americans had power in the state legislature. But due to, the haste of the compromise, as well as the counter revolution after radical Reconstruction, we saw that power that was concentrated with African Americans stripped away and placed back in the hands of these sharecropper and these other segments of capital. I think in this case, we've seen again the power of athletics, the fact that these football players who understand the voice they have, the abilities they have in terms of making money for the school, but as well as the voice they have in terms of influence. Kylin Hill speaking out and saying that he will never represent Mississippi again as long as that flag is raising high. That's powerful and has a huge impact. And you also can't, you got new coaches, Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, and there's even been controversy about will they change the name Ole Miss? Will it still be the Rebels? And I think that's kind of the next thing that we'll see, a new change we'll see. But let's not forget new coaches, Lane Kiffin, Mike Leach. Mike Leach is a big Trump supporter, but he actually lost a player who was probably on the fence anyway, but he had shared a video or tweet of old white person with what looked like a noose, and there was a huge controversy around that with Mike Leach. That, of course, he doesn't want to do anything that makes him look like he's not on the right side of history.
Well, that
and
player
was Lane Kiffin.
And that player ended up, I believe, transferring to Florida State.
Yeah, Florida State. I think he was a lineman.
Yeah, defensive lineman.
Defensive lineman, yeah. So, I mean, I think you're seeing that impact of how culture is affecting politics and so forth. You're seeing that shift, like a material, qualitative shift that has just not occurred in the past, to the point that all these players are empowered on all their campuses to seek whatever changes they want. And I think something just as small as changing the name to a stadium, changing the name of the statue, getting this, racist, stuff. Those are small things.
Right.
Is that going to save somebody's life? Like police accountability? No. Would that give people housing, like fighting for affordable housing or free housing? No. But it's a step in the right direction. And symbols do matter. There's a reason why the Confederacy uses those symbols, because they know it matters. And therefore, I think, we should support all these efforts, because this is like, changing the name to a school or like, this is probably Kylin Hill, a lot of those Mississippi State Ole Miss players' first time getting involved with any type of political public advocacy. First time. So we should support that, and we praise that, and we want them to get more involved, and we want to engage with them. That's how we should do it.
And Kylin Hill is a guy who's from a town called Columbus, Mississippi, which is near Starkville, east Mississippi, near Alabama. So, I mean, it's a very old school place. And for Kylin Hill to take that kind of stand, having been from the state of Mississippi, playing in Mississippi, I think is especially powerful. Because I was interested 100%. To see whether he was grew up in Mississippi or was from out of state, whatever it may be. But yeah, he is. He's from nearby their campus too in Starkville.
Well, let's not forget. Did you remember when Obama's election, there was actually a riot at Ole Miss?
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that. Yeah.
So, it wasn't like James Meredith in 1962 where Kennedy had to bring in the National Guard and stuff, and it was literally like another civil war. But it was,
my her cousin actually played at Ole Miss. He played with Hugh Freeze.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I know. Michael Hicks from Jackson.
Mike Hicks played there from Jackson. Mm-hmm. Jamal Harvey, Super 11 recruit. He was like a year after you. He went to Ole Miss and played some safety. Ole Miss has always, had a strong history down here in Jacksonville and recruiting and whatnot. So, but it's also, it's fucking Ole Miss. It's in Oxford, Mississippi. Levels, it has that's going to change sooner rather than later.
Right. So, you mentioned radical reconstruction. It made me think, like W.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction in America, he basically goes into the whole, the dispelling the myths about Reconstruction being this bad, terrible time, and just basically, using data, just showing how for so many folks, it was the most democratic experiment in period in American history. It was just, sadly, there's been a lot of criticism of Grant and whatnot, but Grant actually used Ulysses S. Grant, the troops to go crush the Klan, and you had late presidents who came in later that just totally abandoned it. You lost the political will, and they repatriated they repatriated the Confederate high command. So, when you talk about people want to criticize revolutionaries and the revolution, so over executions and all these and things, and they're and seeing them as just committing violence instead of responses to violence. These the fact that people were freed from slavery, but then the very people responsible for that condition were then not only not like hanged like in any other revolution or rebellion, where a group of people, it breaks off from the country they've sworn, their allegiance to, and launches the country into a civil war. They're able to gain back their citizenship, and it's, I think it really, it's tragic, and it shows, like a lost opportunity where history could have moved forward in a different way. But the reality is, like, once, they had, the state power behind them, and, made deals, and people were sold out, and went back to sharecropping. Jim Crow came in, and as a result, we had another 80, 90 years before, got back to that stage again, being able to like kind of, start dismantling that system. And that process is not over, as we clearly understand now. Let's move on real quick to like what's going on with NASCAR, because I think it's really significant. The Bubba Wallace, like speaking out on the Confederate flag. This race in Talladega, Alabama last weekend was the first since the unified NASCAR rule policy about no flags in the racetrack. I originally tweeted something out that ended up not being exactly correct because the picture was not with the race. It was a socially distanced crowd. NASCAR did enforce the policy, actually. Usually you have the big Confederate flag displays at the RVs in the infield. They have sort of the big partying and stuff goes on. And but that, NASCAR did enforce it. What did happen though was the Sons of Confederate Veterans rented a plane to fly around the track. NASCAR does not have control over that, saying defund NASCAR, which is kind of hilarious in the sense that I guess they're just trying to be provocative, but it makes you wonder if they're that stupid that they really think like, there's I guess you could say, they're going to appeal to what Fox or ESPN to like, cut their contracts, the NASCAR. But anyways, they're trying to, obviously make fun of like the calls to defund the police, and it's not very funny. It's pretty lame actually. But the reality is that, look, this whole controversy, first of all, Bubba Wallace with the noose, he didn't make any statement about this. He didn't like go in there. He didn't even see it. His crew goes in there. And the picture of this thing, like, I mean, his crew was absolutely right. And I'm glad NASCAR came out yesterday and released the images because, look, there's all sorts of knots you can tie. Anyone who's ever been in scouts or whatever, or just learned to go camping or something, anything, there's a ton of different knots people use for different purposes. To have a knot like that, it has a very specific like look and a specifically like, area that can fit around someone's neck, to be used as a garage door pull down. And then to say it's just been there as no big deal, that's almost even a worse admission. That it's just like, that's just a normal thing. And it happens that the only one that's that garage door pull down happens to be the number 43 car for Bubba Wallace. And then what really, 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 blows my mind. It doesn't really blow my mind. That's the wrong word, but it's amazing of just how excited people on the right and certain people that are so upset about all the calls for social justice, all the calls for racial justice, all the calls for police accountability, all the calls for transforming society from so many of the things that have held us back and that have prevented racial progress from being made in meaningful ways, and people that are absolutely entrenched in their beliefs that there's no national oppression, that whatever, they're just delusional, but they're so excited when they heard from the FBI that this was a hoax, right? That it was not a hate crime, was their words, right?
They wanted to equate it to the Jussie Smollett situation.
Exactly, which brings me to
I don't even that situation. I don't trust the cops.
I don't either. But I mean,
but I get your point. But
I gotta finish real quick. I'm sorry. The whole thing's the FBI, and it's like the idea that like people hear, like, oh, the FBI brought 15 agents down there. They concluded, well, the FBI should be about the least credible source when it comes to anything racial justice related that I can think of on the face of the planet. I mean, I was having this discussion with a number of people today. You go back to COINTELPRO, first of all, means counterintelligence program. In fact, if anything, from the days of Martin Luther King to the days where they worked in cohorts with the Chicago Police Department to murder Fred Hampton, using an informant to help them do that, and the guy named O'Neill, who sold out Fred Hampton, was a security guy. Like, the FBI has persistently, it was J. Edgar Hoover's baby. one of the most racist, vile individuals in U.S. history. And that's saying a lot, but I'll say it. And the reality is that they have no credibility. And for people to sit that and report out that somehow the FBI says it's not a hate crime, and give that credence, I think we need to hammer home every chance we get that the FBI has as much credibility as Alex Jones, all right, when it comes to like issues of race or whatever else, because I don't want to hear it. And I think that I am glad that I find myself funny being so gung-ho about agreeing with NASCAR right now, because it's not usually a position I find myself in. But the fact that they came out and released the pictures showing just what that noose looked like, right? Because there was all this BS going out and there was no way to really prove it wrong that, oh, like it wasn't a noose. And if you see the image there, and I'm sorry, just 2 + 2 = 4, you look at that, at the very least, there's nothing, no conspiracy with Bubba Wallace. There's none of that BS. And you know, I think it reveals just again, just how the, you know, these reactionary elements, how triggered they are, how upset they are, and how we're in a moment right now where they are fearful. And while we got them on the run, it's time to keep it moving.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right. So
yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. I like my last point I make is funny, like the same. I mean, I guess the people that would it's funny how like I was like all the Trumpers will probably agree with us now on the FBI simply because of the FBI and the whole Russiagate bullshit. But
well,
I get your point. No, I found that just funny and ironic. But now they love the FBI because the FBI is telling them that there was nothing happening. Whatever. It's like total bullshit.
Well,
like there's a faction of this country that never wants to admit that oppression in any form exists. They say there's no racial oppression. These people are just whining. There's no worker rights oppression. These people just don't want to work. It's been like that in every system, like class, national oppression that exists, and these like racist deniers, you know what I'm saying? But they'll bring up race at any conference, at any turn. Like these are the same people who will be like, oh, he was just bored. They always want to be, say it's hate crime and racist, whatever. And then they'll see a video of a black cop whooping the ass of a white person, and then says, "I thought it was about race, haha." You know what I mean? Like they're trying to find that gotcha. Like I got you. You say it's about race. It isn't. Stop being an asshole.
Well, I mean,
clearly, like he didn't find it. That looks like a noose. He didn't find it. His team identified it. NASCAR even said that of all the ropes that were found, that was the only rope that looked like that. So it's obviously something that foul, but I think it's part of this reaction from racist white America that wants to create this bubbling backlash to this huge, widespread, broad movement that they've seen developed off of the oppression of white supremacy and imperialism in this country. And I think they're going to keep getting mad. It's going to keep getting even more intenser, but I think that's something that we should see, that we are winning.
Right.
We are advancing the cause here nationally, locally, domestically to change some of this stuff, at least build a movement that could one day, let's say, be a radical revolutionary movement that could change the foundations of this country. Like we aren't there yet, but we're bubbling towards that. And I think the reactionaries know it, and all you see is fear, an old order that's dying. These daughters of the Confederacy are not going to have an organization in 5 years, and that's the truth.
Yeah, so I mean, you're right. I mean, this whole the fear is real. It's palpable. You got people on the run. You got a new. It's crazy. COVID happens. George Floyd happens. People, it's like we've had this confluence of events now that I think one of the biggest things you can't overstate the importance of is the fact that, through struggle and then through practical experience and then people's own personal struggle, they're able to and then with all this extra time people have, most people at least, well, I shouldn't say it, a lot of people are out working harder than ever right now. All right. But in a reality, with the lockdown and people not being able to go out, it obviously depends on people's circumstances, but the reality is that people are reevaluating things. People are looking at things differently. and they're starting to, as things deteriorate and the contradictions of the neoliberal capitalist system is become more and more apparently absurd and ridiculous. And like the fact that this system, we can't mobilize to deal with COVID-19. We can't, because of this romanticizing of individualism and the rugged individual, this kind of national ethos. That's exactly the kind of ideology that makes it impossible to have a coordinated, effective response to a pandemic, to coordinate public health, to not to mention coordinate housing. The fact we're about to have a mass eviction crisis, which is going to be happening soon. Unemployment's going to be running out soon. These are crises that this system is not equipped to handle, and they're going to explode these contradictions.
100%.
Right.
And the only thing that keeps this idea that the American experiment is still working is the concept of American exceptionalism, or this faith in something that hasn't been seen. Because I just don't see how you can have, with COVID, it's created even a more of a confederation of these states kind of aligning together. The West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington all doing the same thing. Tri-state area, the South always kind of been its own individual. You're seeing such a breakdown of these traditional ruling class institutions, and they're turning on each other, and these certain segments of the population, daughters of the Confederacy, that have been given lip service simply because at one time or another they had more influence. Right. The dialectic we're seeing is that Sons of Confederacy, those type of formations that had influence, they're dying, they're withering away. Like the family of, in Jacksonville, we have a park called Hemming Plaza. It's named after a segregationist or a racist. Only Charles Hemming, I'm not necessarily 100% sure what he did. He was a racist, I know. His family's pissed off that they're moving the Confederate statue out of there, and they're trying to rename the park. Do you think in this time and which side? Well, let's look at how the liberal capitalists are aligning themselves. They're at least paying lip service to Black Lives Matter,
right?
And racist symbols. That's the only way for capitalism and imperialism to stay in power in this country, is for them to pay lip service but not do it practically.
Right.
And it's on the people in the streets to push this revolution in a practical way and organizing and whatnot. But these far right lunatics that still want the ultra racist symbolism, they're shit out of luck. And I think they're gonna, they're dying as a force in this country, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I think they're not going to go away without a fight, but their power is weakening so significantly that you see their influence on these schools and these name changes. That has a huge impact, and I don't think they're going to have that same impact in 5 years.
No, and I think let's go ahead and start to close it out. And my final point I want to make is just like the irony of these right wingers, the people that are talking about where people are erasing history. First of all, the last thing we want to do is erase history. We want to teach history. We want history to be accessible. We want to bring it out and analyze the contradictions, talk about the Civil War, talk about the Confederacy, talk about what it really was, really break it down. Don't just have a history course where we learn a little bit about the Battle of Gettysburg and move on. But we're talking about what symbols we choose to honor in public spaces. It's not erasing history. It's actually completely the opposite. It's taking charge of things and making conscious decisions over these things, because most people honestly drive by these things that are even right wingers and don't even care. But it's a symbol of power, and it's a symbol of keeping people kind of in their lane, in their place where they think they're supposed to be. And the reality is, when they're saying all these people, are having, all these tears, and they're getting their feelings hurt, it has nothing to do with those emotional hurt feelings type stuff. I'm so sick of that type of argument, because it's the reality is, who gets their feelings hurt the most? Who is the most aggrieved and outraged, right? When they talk about, the name of a park, or the name of or a symbol coming down, right? These people are the ones out there crying. I mean, I've seen videos of people just acting like their world's coming to an end. Their identity as they know it is ceasing to exist. And yet we want to hear from Charlie Kirk and and Candace Owens and these like right-wingers, snowflakes like Ben Shapiro, they want to sit here and act like they're these rugged, tough individuals that are like tired of all these people out here crying, tired of these people out here, you know, being all sensitive and we've like in our safe spaces and stuff. It's so disgusting. It's so tired. I'm over it. I'm tired of it, right? And I think people need to stop being afraid to just like push back in a way that calls them out for projecting the very behaviors they're engaging in on other people about being sensitive and all that. It's about
100%.
Understanding history. It's about understanding like what it really means in context. And it's about empowerment of people. And if you want to make it about anything else, you know, it's just BS. It is what it is. So that's all I got to say for tonight, Mike. I'll give you the floor and we'll go ahead and close it out after that for this episode of Redspin Sports. So go ahead, Mike.
No, I think you said all that could be said. You know, I want to thank everybody for watching this. I mean, I think what we've seen in the past, even couple, you know, we've done three episodes of the show so far. Two that have been kind of published, but one that was kind of a pro, you know, kind of like a video we did.
Right.
So much has changed in these 3 weeks. You know, this show, like Nate's idea, started as a concept of kind of showing the interconnection between sports and politics to show folks and to kind of create that space to kind of create these conversations about sports. And we had no idea that George Floyd would happen. And then all of a sudden, all these athletes are becoming activists, you know, which further shows the powerful point. So in essence, Redspin Sports is kind of validated through the practical experiences we've seen with all these athletes and the political nature of sports and how it's affected our society and how it's continuing to affect our society. So, I mean, 100%, these symbols matter, you know, and these symbols are getting taken down. And I think these collegiate athletes, these professional athletes, they're playing a huge impact in making that happen. And like I always say, we got to support them in every way we can, while also drawing out the contradictions that do exist with these racists and whatnot who want to make money off of the labor of these folks, but off the field want them to shut up and dribble or just shut up and catch a ball. Yet they think that football is a safe space for them. You know, football and sports is no longer a safe space for y'all. Y'all can piss off.
Yeah, and I couldn't have said it any better. It's not a safe space for them. The only way it was a safe space is all they have to do is go and stand up and watch a flyover and have a bunch of people, like Mike just said, shut up and dribble and entertain them and reinforce that they're part of their situation in this class hierarchy and where they are in the world. There's nothing wrong with it, that if you fail, it's all your own fault. There's no injustice other than your own individual failings and or a few bad apples, right, that we root out through the system. And that's why they love going and standing for these displays of just ultra-nationalistic patriotism and militarism, because to them, everything, the system works in their mind. Well, pre-COVID, right? We'll see how things keep progressing, but to a certain segment, right? And those are the people we're referring to. Those are the people that are so upset, that are out there losing their minds right now and doing the exact same things that they accused all these lefty safe space snowflakes of doing, right? Which is just it's got to stop, and it's going to stop. So I think we're going to keep blowing the lid off that, exposing these clowns, and we'll call it a wrap for the night, though. So until next time, take care and keep fighting.